Hey, it's Chris, Liege Games. Today, we are talking about unconscious minds. What are my thoughts on this game from Fantasia Games as a mid-weight, heavier Euro-style game? What do you need to know? Is it right for you? Highs, lows, hinge points, potentially for you as a backer or as someone who's either interested in these games in general, or if you're more someone like me who is not used to always playing games like this, is this a good fit for you? Let me help you make your decision. Let's do this. Freud is known for preaching the catechism of psychoanalysis within the field of psychology. He is quoted as saying that the scientific process is thought to be a very exact, very deterministic. But he really says that the capacity of a content scientific mind is to know that the confirmation is not always fully there. And this game, in a nutshell, encapsulates that, and the incorporation of those elements into this game kind of makes it what it is. Let's talk about how it actually interacts. Let's talk about where the important parts are, and let me tell you why some of those parts are getting those labels from myself, at least. I don't know if they're in the designer's minds, but let's talk about that for a second here. The big thing that you need to know about this game is there are several different boards that you're going to be manipulating on. You're going to have 3 boards of your own. And there are going to be 2 other play boards that you're going to be dealing with on an interacting basis. Now, you're going to be interacting, and I use that term loosely, because on both of these boards, there are going to be places in which there is going to be interaction to be able to happen, but it is not what we would call necessarily direct interaction, as with most Euro games of this complexity. The board I have in front of me right here is what's known as the meeting table. This is where the crux of the action is going to take place on a turn-by-turn, round-by-round basis as you're trying to score the most victory points. How you're doing that, though, is the complexity that rivals Freud's theories. Because this is a multi-pronged approach, a multi-layered analysis of how you can get the most points to maximize what's available to you on a turn-by-turn basis. So what you're going to be doing on this meeting table, for example, you're going to be having these tiles that as you play them, they get flipped face up. Now, the difference between face up and face down becomes very important as you start to be able to buy these tiles, essentially. Because what you're doing is you're seeing that on each of these tiles, that on the left side and the right side, there are 2 different things. Now, the pile as well on the far left gives you just the backside. And just the backside is available because when you buy those and you place those into your board, you take them and put them on your own personal player board. This is what's going to be going in the rows and the columns that are present on this board. And so that's going to basically be your selection system of the actions you can take as you move your little jar, which is really a rondel that will activate each of these spaces as you go along. If it activates this row, it activates all the tiles that are in this row, and so on and so forth. Both of these rows and columns also have pieces at the ends that are going to be unlockable, that are going to give you additional bonuses when you are able to unlock them. By filling them, you get to remove these extra little pieces, and these pieces become important because they'll play into one of your other boards that we'll talk about in a minute. So you can see the basic setup of what your player board, your main player board, looks like here, right? As you go down, you activate the rows, you go across, you activate the rows, and then if you go over to one of the other 2 spaces, it activates your special abilities. And this is where this player board becomes a little bit different and one of the main key action points that you need to realize. This is going to get you victory points depending on where you are on the reputation track, which, I mean, victory points are great, but in this game, easy straight victory points are never going to be the best thing you can do, which is very refreshing if you're a heavy strategist. And this top row is also going to give you the ability to instead unlock your additional idea bubbles, or in this case, what are really your workers. Not only does it allow you to take the columns, but it gives you just an additional worker that you can then put into your pool of total workers that's going to go then back to the board here below. And these workers then are going to be how you utilize these spaces, because these are the common spaces of the meeting table that you're going to be taking. So when I say that most of your actions are going to be on this board, I really mean most of your actions are going to be on this board, because this is where you're spreading these all over. And you'll notice that the shapes of these idea bubbles reflect the shapes on the mat themselves. And this is probably one of the more clever things that I really like about this game, because you can see that this space will give you access to these 4 different actions. And so if somebody takes the one that you want, this is not a heavy, mean game. However, you can still get the one you want in a different space, pointing in the same direction. And now the point tells you which action you're going for. And then in this case, this tells you what row you're going to be buying this tile from. This is the cost. These are the equivalencies of what you can do. The symbology is relatively straightforward once you get used to it. The other tricky sticking point here, though, is you can actually select how many workers you want to be present at each space. So for example, 1 lightning bolt, 2 lightning bolts, 3 lightning bolts, equal to, say, number of workers that you want to put in said space. So I can only put 1 there. But if I want to put 2 here, okay, great. Or you know what? I want to put all 3 down here. Awesome. I can take this action 3 times then on that one turn. And that is the first half of the majority of what you're going to be doing, is placing those out. Then potentially you are either along according to this side, moving your roundel a number of spaces, or you are doing the other most important action in the game in itself in the first place. And that is, you are going to be taking one of your patients and you are going to be treating them for the maladies that ail them. And it's not just the maladies that ail them based on what's in the card in front of you, right? It's also taking one of these handy dandy clear transparent cards, placing it over top, counting up the hearts, and then figuring out, now I need 6 hearts to cure this patient. Intrigued? You should be. It's a very clever way that gives you multiple ways of scoring while still only making it one element in multiple pieces, because you can see that there are points on this, potentially, there are points on this, potentially as well, as a bonus, and also a combinatorial system that will give you extra if you can match it up correctly with the dreams, and we'll talk about that in a second. But this is the other main mechanism we'll dive into just a little bit. Now, the other thing I like about this main board right here before we go anywhere else is that if you buy one of these tiles, like I said, you get the bonus on the right, and that's where it really behooves you to buy it from the main board as opposed to paying the lesser cost of 1 coffee in this case to just get the action tile to be able to utilize on your rondel later. Because these bonuses are not insignificant, as especially you start to dig deeper in these piles, because the bonuses are better at the stage 2 tiles than they are in the stage 1 tiles. Now, the other ones are relatively intuitive. We'll talk about those when we get to the other map. Basically, you're going to be interacting on the 2 or 3 other boards that you're going to be dealing with as you go along. I can see people, though, potentially not liking the ability to have this board be as tight as you may prefer. And so in the 2-player example, for example, they give you spots where you're going to be putting down these workers and you are just blocked off, and you can rearrange it however you want, depending on if you get in a couple games and you find that you don't like certain ones or you think certain ones are overpowered. You can block off, say, these 4 spots and still have access to these, but you have to be very careful because then it's going to really tie heavily into the rondel side of things as well. But like I mentioned, you're either moving your rondel, activating your own individual board, like I mentioned, or you're treating your patients. Now, obviously, the next phase of things, the 2 main key differences is if you run out of said workers, you have to pull them off the board and recall them, which then either gets you this handy dandy recall bonus, or again, you can treat your patients. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the neatest part of this game. Let's talk about the most entertaining, the biggest crux of the game is treating the patients. So now we get to see what it actually is when you are doing your Freudian analysis, trying to cure these patients. Each patient, as I mentioned before, is going to have a combination of one of these little clear plastic cards over their actual player card. And why you want to be curing these is, well, this is the main way you're going to be giving victory points between the clear plastic as well as the clientele. you can have now up to 2 clientele that you can be treating at a single time. Now, the other tricky part here is at the beginning of the game, you can see that one is blocked off in terms of spots here. And until you cure the first one, you cannot unlock the second spot. And then whenever you have an empty spot, you'll be able to populate it and put one down in place of it as you go. You have your 2 different types of dreams that you will be unlocking along with it as you layer one of each down on top of each other, so that these are what you're having to use for the majority of the treatment. Because as you go across here, you can see at the bottom of each of these cards, it gives you a formulaic of give these resources, get this reward. Right? Makes sense now. You're starting to see the connections. Because earlier on the meetup table, you saw that we were increasing or gathering our tableau so that we could get some of these resources. And that's really where, if we move the clientele aside here, you start to have this other resource track for you as the 3 different aspects that you're going to be utilizing to cure your patients in the first place. And so each patient is represented on this track by the number of hearts that they start out with. And that's how many green hearts you're going to have to use. And so as you go along, you're going to be bumping this track down and down and down and down until it gets to 0. And when they get to the little yellow spot here, the 3 spot, if you will, you remove the malady and you score that immediately, getting this resource, getting this number of victory points. And if you have a matching dream that went along with that, well, then you get an extra bonus as well. Then until you score the rest of whatever's left on the client, you get the client. And the client has 2 very important aspects that are going to play into the next phase of things that I have not talked about. One is you get just a freaking amazing ability. All of these are game-changing abilities, rule-breaking abilities, right? You're unlocking the unconscious. See what I did there? And then you are also getting set collection, because set collection is also going to be a way that you can score on the travel board at a later point, instead of one of the other bonuses that you may be taking. And this is, again, a bonus optimization game, I would say, at heart of how you're going to manage, at what point, in which direction, how you're going to mitigate and calculate potentially, and sometimes roll the dice, calculate which one's going to be better for you at which time. Makes sense, right? Relatively straightforward. You can see the pieces starting to come together, and these clients are slowly revealing themselves as they go along. And like I said, the dreams themselves will give you different ways of getting the hearts. You have a main action as well of one of each of the 3 different levels on your resource board to be able to pay to get 2 hearts at any time as well. So in case you just can't get the mitigation you want, you need just 2 more. Well, there you go. That's sort of the Catan. You can always trade in 4 to 1, right? That's what this is the equivalent of. And these are giving you other ways to do other things with other bonuses. A little light bulb, which is a free one-time use worker placement, and then just extra victory points and whatever else in between. So then that's relatively taken care of now. So then front and center becomes this resource board in which you are going to be manipulating not only out, but around, depending on what resources are going to be present for you. Because that's where coffee is going to become one of your most important resources. If you remember the meetup board earlier, it's how you're acquiring all of these tiles in the first place. And there's a lot of them. There's a lot of them that are freaking good. And so if you're looking at it from that aspect of things, yeah, that's an important thing. But this is how you're mitigating them. Caffeine is giving you the ability to not only move them out a slot by paying, but you can also change the type that it is as well. Yeah. And the tricky part is you only have so many of these resources that you can allocate at once. But that's also where this board comes in, and you can unlock these on the side, and then they get put in the pool, and you can utilize them in that or some of the other bonuses that I just sort of alluded to a minute ago. Okay, things are slowly connecting. You can see, as I mentioned with the generic one, this level shape, this level shape, this level shape, and then the 3 different types and manipulation of them, up, down, around. There you go. So at this point you're going, Chris, well, what about the last board? This is, this is great. You've shown me 3 of your own player boards, which is, a lot going on, a lot managed, but it's relatively intuitive. Where's the nitty gritty of those hard decision makings that you were just talking about, right? And here you go. This is more of the travel board. You have Freud and you have your characters, which are going to be traversing along these locations around the outside. And Freud is going to be doing the same thing. Freud is going to be one of those things that you can activate, you can utilize, you can manipulate to an advantage, either to take the actions of where Freud is, because he's still your mentor, or you can move to Freud to be able to then take actions there, or, you know, do other things if you need to. And this also leads me into the ingenious part of how this game is put together as a whole. We think of games in a normal sense of they're taking X number of rounds or X number of points, right? Reach a threshold, game over. In this game, they've decided that various triggers through bonuses of the dreams or the clientele or even the bonus spaces on this board are going to be eventually able to give you a very valuable resource, which is called a reputation. And reputation is important, right? I mean, thematically incorporated, reputation is, you know, character. And so what you're doing in this case is, as you gain reputation, Freud gains reputation, because you are Freud's disciples, his associates, his trainees. And so he moves and you move. You get another reputation, he gets another reputation. And it doesn't matter who gets the reputation. It might be one of the other players, for example, and then I don't have any of those out here, but you might get 2 for them. And so your reputation is still here, their reputation maybe is there, but Freud's reputation gets up to the top, and then it's game over. And that's how the game ends. That's how the game goes. Because the victory points at the same time are going to be tracked around the outside, and that's really what matters in this case. Reputation is good, but points are better. Points, money, say what you want at that sense, is better. And so the interaction on the reputation track is, if you go back to that roundel that I mentioned, the roundel allows you to score the points that are above here, but also take actions of anywhere where Freud is to the left. So it's an additional bonus action. As Freud gets more renown, you get more ability to manipulate things on the board. So that's one thing. The other actions that I mentioned is some of the other maneuvers on the board will allow you to manipulate around at these locations. And you'll have 2 different spots on these locations. Actions that you can be taking right here, as well as bonuses that you can acquire if your worker is at that location. And that's one of the other recall bonuses. If you remember what I said earlier, you can treat the client, or you can take a recall bonus, which requires you to take one of these markers off of one of the areas you're in, place it on the side here or on the bottom here. And that's where also that set collection aspect of things that I mentioned earlier. And that's where the clientele at the set collection aspect give you the ability to get enough of those to be able to score mucho victory points as well that way. Or just the actions that are going to be going alongside of these are going to be potential resources that are going to take you longer to get if you went the original way. And if you pull one off here up the center, it's also another way to get reputation. So it advances the game in multiple different avenues. So now you've heard me ramble on the key mechanisms and the key interactions of this game. What are the pros? What are the cons? Who is this right for? Who should be avoiding this game? All in all, is this an excellent game? Yeah, I think this is going to be a very excellent game. I went into this kind of going, how much of this is hype? How much of this is just excellence splayed out in a multi-board, layered thematic incorporation? And it's definitely the latter in terms of being greater than the sum of the individual parts. The pieces work really, really well together. And I say this as someone who does not play this complexity of game very often, right? Because most of the time when I look at a game like this, I go, I just can't connect the dots. My brain is very tactical. And the nice thing about this game is it offers me a significant portion of tactics while still aligning with the strategy overarching. Now, I'm not going to tell you I'm good at this game. That's a whole nother conversation. I'm not good at this game. But I enjoy the combinatorial system that they have set up with the different ways of manipulating based on what is available to me on a turn-by-turn basis and how I can action optimize. And don't get me wrong, I didn't even cover 2 other portions of this game where you've got yourself doing research and getting cited and publishing articles that are going to give you additional victory points that you can steal and cite other people's work and get credit for, or you can just get the research cards Or you can just get the end game scoring locations that are going to give you additional bonuses, or the research cards that are going to allow you to get extra bonuses and cite and publish in the first place. So I'm not even covering a breadth of what this game can do. But is it right for you? That's the question you have to ask yourself. Because I think the fear in a game like this, the trepidation that I have mainly of intimidation when I look at a game like this, is it's doing so much. There is too much for me to keep track of. Unless I'm playing ELO level 2000 chess like a grandmaster, am I going to actually be able to understand what's going on, or even, dare I say, compete with the people I'm playing against? And I didn't feel like it was overwhelming from that standpoint, because I've played a lot of those games where that is the case. And this is not one of those, but don't also be fooled. I'm not saying in any way that this is easy or you can solve it, or there's so much going on that will change on a turn-by-turn basis, and the variable nature of things like what dream cards are out, or what dream cards are available for you, or what clientele is available for you, for which powers you're going to be trying to get in order to maximize your engine, at the same time of where Freud is and how you're going to be utilizing the small tiles to the end game scoring tiles. All of that is going to give you an incredible depth of variability and replayability at the same time. Now, do you need all of it? I don't know. That's where I'm going to put the onus on other people to tell you how different is this from other mid or heavier Euros. I can't compare that because that's not my usual. But I can tell you, it's sort of like the Supreme Court once said, I know it when I see it. If you know what I'm referring to, you know what I'm referring to. But in this case, I'm referring to excellence. I know it when I see it. Whether or not it is personally always to my tastes, it's easy to recognize. And that's what unconscious mind is from that aspect. It's going to have the appeal for people that are looking for something mid-weight that's going to play about a 2.5 hour, but it's not going to be overwhelmingly intimidating for people like myself who are looking to dip their toes in this water of complexity. And that's probably the biggest compliment I can give it, because that means it's enticing for a large or larger portions of our hobbyists. And to do that and not just feel like you've got mechanism for the sake of mechanism or board for the sake of board, it's rather impressive. Again, the biggest criticism that I would say at this point is that you could probably make the argument that maybe one or two of these extra things, these extra layers, like the research, like the citing, not necessarily the cards that go along with it. I mean, these are a nice set collection-ish. Even the victory point locations, they don't feel as connected. They don't feel as important as some of the other stuff. And so you maybe could make the argument that one or two of these sort of things, maybe you could do without. Maybe that aren't highly or as highly utilized in a game-to-game basis as the other elements, the other connections, the other ways to score. It's also not going to be as cutthroat as you may like, where, if you can't get the spot you need, you're really having to pivot or alternate or switch your strategies up. As I said with the meeting board has a lot of locations, and you can literally pivot your worker position to point in a different direction to still get the same one that you want, even if the position that was the most optimal for you is full. And so that's another thing, that if you're looking for that sort of cutthroatness in this strategy type Euro game, it's not going to have as much of. Also, if you're looking for a lot of interaction, this is not going to be for you, again, because the interaction is relatively indirect, and it's definitely on the lesser side of things in the scaling. Now, it's obviously going to be more with more people, but still, even with the meeting board having a little bit more crowded worker placement spaces, I mean, there are literally 16 different places, and between putting them down and having to cycle them back up, there's not going to be necessarily that crunch of, wow, this is the only thing left for me. The other thing that I can see people maybe not being a fan of, which I personally was more of a fan of just because of how unique it was and how different it made you time things, was the end game condition of having Freud get to 10 reputation and being a sum total of the reputation that is gathered throughout the game. That's a unique mechanic when you sit down and play it, of how things are going to be timed. And so I could also see people just not enjoying how that happens, because when it happens, you finish the round and play one more. So, I mean, I like the fact that there's also one more. It's not just, boom, done. But I can also see people not liking it because if reputation isn't being scored, the game could drag out a little bit as well. There's not necessarily a rush to score reputation necessarily. The biggest frustration, if you're looking at this as more of the strategician, if you're looking at more as the heavy Euro side of things, right? Things like having some of these dream cards only be available to you at certain times, having a pool of them that you can draft from, and that's sort of where you can get, or only having a few of these clients that you can draft from at whatever level, because there's general and then there's sort of an advanced clientele. Not having necessarily your pick of them, having more randomization because it is from a deck. Same thing with the action tiles, right? There are going to be certain action tiles that are going to have slight better or slight varied bonuses. A lot of them are giving you manipulation of these resources, but a few of them are not. And sometimes if you only end up with a few of these or have availability for these and other people are getting other ones, I mean, I could see you being a little bit perturbed at that. Now, I would argue that there's enough ways to get around that aspect of things that it shouldn't stop you from being successful, but I can see that being an element that people don't like. I think the bumping around of Freud is a nice touch as an NPC, essentially, in the game, a worker that can be manipulated but not owned, which allows for another freedom of expression on the board for manipulation and tactical strategy, if you will. I will also say that the use of these clear cards to give variable amounts of hearts that are needed to cure these patients, as well as the ability to heal them partially and then finish them off at a later point, to allow progression with each sense of doing so, is really satisfying. Because there's sometimes a sense of, if I can't do this all at once, it's going to be a massive disappointment, right? And so to be able to chip away at it and then finally achieve it and reap the rewards fully of them are great. And the abilities on these cards that you're unlocking, again, probably my favorite part of this game overall, in order to bend or change the rules along the way as you go. I love asymmetric powers that are in any style of game, and this is no exception. And to be honest, I really actually love the rondo system too. I think rondos are highly underutilized. I love seeing them. I don't always see them accomplished well, but when they are done well, they are one of my favorite, underutilized mechanisms across the board, even as a non-worker placement person as a whole. And the ability, again, to go right along with that, to manipulate multiple of these idea tokens in one space, or to be able to manipulate the board I didn't even mention on the travel board and do the action at those places as well more than once, and being able to determine, okay, if I do this 2 or 3 times, is it going to behoove me more, or should I be saving those and spreading them out equally? That is clever. And it's one thing to be clever. It's another thing to be clever and have it work really fun and to have it be enjoyable while you're doing that. And this strikes the trifecta of those 3 things when it comes to this mechanism too. So, I mean, final thoughts here. I mean, obviously, I enjoyed this game. Is this going to be a game that I get played a ton? No, it's not, because like I said, this is not my usual. But if this was the one that I dipped my toes into to introduce to other people in my game group, or my wife too, as an example of, okay, this is what you're doing and how these interact, I think it's more approachable than what it leads onto in the first place. I feel more confident in explaining this one than I have with several other of these I have played recently. And that also is the mark of a good game. Like, I can teach this to somebody else and explain it to them as easily as I can start to learn it. And I love that. So Unconscious Mind, Fantasia Games. There you go. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you have comments, questions, or concerns down below. If you like this, let me know. Subscribe to the YouTube thing. Click, whatever. And thank you, Fantasia Games, for sending this to me so I can talk to you about it in the first place. It just works. It's enjoyable. And that's what all games should be, no matter the complexity. So, there you go. Stay classy. Have a great day.